So now that we know all the background information we really need to make choices in our programs, let's figure out how to actually do it in code. So the first topic we're going to talk about is something called simple selection. Simple selection is when our programs can make one or two choices at a time, that is. So one or two choices. So what that means is that as we flow down the path, what we can do is we can diverge from this path when the result is true of our test expression, and then come back to the path at a later point. If the result is false, then it just continues on the regular path. So that is one choice. So we can see one choice is either going on there or it's just continuing on. So that's one choice to make. Two choices is when we come down, and instead of there even being a regular path, there's two separate paths that the code must actually take. In one case, the result is true of the test expression. In the other case, the result is false. We can see that there actually is no central path anymore. The code must take one of those two options. So we're going to look at how we actually do this. So let's start off with the first one, which is the most basic form of simple selection, called an if statement. If statement. So just generally to go over the syntax, let's keep it simple. Syntax is very simple. If some form of test expression is true, then perform the code inside. So this is code that executes, that runs, when test expression evaluates to true. And then we just close off our squiggly brackets. We can have as much or as little code inside these brackets as we want, but we have to realize that this is code that only executes when test expression evaluates to true. This is our most basic form of selection. So this one is called an if statement. So let's go back to our code and actually try this out. So going over to our code here, we see that I have a basic console program, and the question is, where would you put code like this? Where would you actually put this if statement? You can't put it in the middle of nowhere, which means you can't put it just somewhere out here. It doesn't work, you're going to get a syntax error. So, just like the rest of any logic that you have in your programs, it must go in only very certain areas. In a console program, it's either going to go here in your main, or it's going to go in some form of subprogram. So I'm back on my English keyboard here. So for example, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just going to keep it in the main, and we're going to do our test expression. But to do that, I'm going to create a simple little variable. This is going to be a local variable. So let's say int user age. We're going to give it the value 14. And now I'm going to do a simple little program afterwards that actually is going to test that value. So I'm going to say, well, if user age is greater than 16, then notice the way I did this. I created my opening bracket, then my closing bracket. That way I never forget to do either one of them. And then I just go inside and just start coding. So inside, we're just going to do a simple statement. The reason why I'm using console is just because it's more simple to do input-output as opposed to the form program, which takes a lot of setup and whatnot, and it's kind of slow. So I'm just going to write line. I'm just going to say get your license. Okay. Now, if you're wondering about the spelling, whether it's American or Canadian spelling, it doesn't really matter. It's just an example. So this code, first thing it's going to do is it's going to declare a variable called user age. It's going to give the value 14. The next thing it's going to do is it's going to compare that variable against the value of 16. So it's going to say, well, is the current value of user age greater than 16? If it is, then execute the code inside. Now, just to demonstrate this, right now the value is 14. So if we run our program, what should we see? Well, let's find out. We see nothing. We see nothing because it never actually goes into this code, because 14 is not greater than 16. So just to demonstrate this, I'm going to put out another form of console or another output, console.writeLine, all done. So if we run this one more time, we'll see that the all done statement still gets executed because, as I showed before, it's following this vertical path down here. It's saying, okay, did we get true on our test expression? No, then we just continue on with the rest of the program. Otherwise, go into that piece and then continue on back with the rest of the program. So this code inside never got touched, it just got ignored. So that is a basic part of that. So we can see that as the program flows, it's going to assign this value, then it's going to test the user age. And if it's true, it will then go inside and execute that code, and then continue on with the rest of the program. If it's false, it just skips that code and continues on with the rest of the program. So that is your most basic form of if statement. Let's try it one more time, but this time we're going to change the value to 17. And this time we should get a bit different output. This time we actually get your license and all done, because 17 is greater than 16, so therefore it's going to go into this code. So I mentioned that there was another form of simple selection. This form of simple selection is just for one choice. But what if we have two choices to make, which is often the case? We either want the code to go in one direction or to go in another direction based on what we're doing. Let's go back to the syntax for a second and expand upon it. So the syntax for an if statement is just what you see here, but we're going to expand upon this now to something called an if-else statement. If-else statement. And the logic is exactly the same, except we're just going to add to this. The only thing we're going to do is add the keyword else, and then an opening bracket, and a closing bracket, and some code. Code that executes, or that runs, when the above test expression this time evaluates to false, because it's got to essentially fail. So in this case, if we watch the flow of the code, it's going to come down, it's going to test this if statement. It's going to say, okay, well, if this is true, then go inside the code. Once I'm done with that code, I don't need to test the else anymore. I'm just going to continue on with the rest of the program. Of course, if the other way around goes, let's just get rid of that. If it comes down and tests this if statement, it says, no, this is no good. What it's going to do is it's going to come down to this else case. And what else means, it's kind of like a safety net. It means whatever else is left over. In this case, whatever was not tested in the test expression to be true. So for example, if we go back to our code here, we have if user age is greater than 16. We can extend upon this and put our else code right below here. And inside here, we could put some other code, console.writeLine. Let's say you're too young. Now the code is only ever going to go into one of these paths because only one could possibly be true. Either the user age is greater than 16 or it's not. Simple as that. So if the user age is greater than 16, which it currently is, it's 17, it's going to come in, it's going to execute this console.writeLine, and then it's going to skip the else case and go all the way down to console.writeLine all done. It's not even going to try and go in here. However, if that user age is not 17, let's say it's 14 again, what's going to happen is it's going to come down here and it's going to say, well, is user age greater than 16? No, it's not. It's 14. So it's going to skip this code and automatically go into the else case. You'll notice that there is no test expression under the else case. There doesn't need to be. Because remember, else just means whatever's left over. So in this case, we tested if it was greater than 16. Well, the only thing that's left over in that comparison is less than or equal to 16. Well, 14 is definitely less than or equal to 16, so it's going to go into this code. So it has to go in one of the two. So that is our if-else statement. Again, only one of them will ever be executed, never both at the same time or never both in the same execution of the code. And again, there is no test here. It's just the keyword else. and that is simple selection.